In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and that life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Those words from the beginning of John's Gospel in the Christian scriptures were written sometime in the decades following the life of Jesus Christ and are intended to introduce him to us. John may have been a contemporary of Jesus, the one described as the beloved disciple in the Gospel. And some have argued that the immediacy and life of his writing suggests that early date and the words of somebody who knew Jesus personally. Others think that the depth and subtlety of reflection mean that it was written later, perhaps by one of a group of followers of the beloved disciple. Reading them in the midst of a pandemic, they speak of a wider perspective from a place where light and love and hope are central. One of the challenges of these present times is that of losing perspective, locked into our homes or into our small circle of possible travel. This book offers a way of looking at our lives and the world which helps us to love and to hope and to build our lives upon a hope that this is not all that there is. And so the book invites us not only to believe, but to make a choice. That's its purpose. It speaks of both light and of dark. That's a recurring theme in all the material that we have attributed to John. He's a generous writer who has love at the centre of his thinking, but he's also realistic about the experience and the possibility of darkness, of evil, of wrong choices. And so we're invited by him to make an existential choice, a fundamental life choice that goes to the heart of all that we are. There is light and there is darkness. There is love and there's the absence of love. There is life and there is death. John's gospel is choose life. The darkness John describes is caused by people turning away from light, life, and love, turning away in his understanding from God. And that's been such a consistent pattern, he believes, that the world has now been gripped by darkness. And the mission of Jesus is to invite men and women to turn back to God, to turn back to the light, to turn back to life, to turn back to love, to turn back towards one another. And that's only possible because in the sacrifice that Jesus makes on the cross, Jesus takes on himself the consequences locked into this world by the collective turning away from one another and from God, which has become like a pollution. Jesus' death as an act of pure, self-giving love provides the existential unlocking of those consequences, the unlocking of death itself. And so the light shines in the darkness, John says, but the darkness has not overcome it. And that's summed up, of course, in one of the best known verses of the Bible, John chapter 3, verse 16. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that those who believe in him should not die, but should have eternal life. And you'll see that John is trying to put across things that are too difficult for ordinary words. So there's a poetry and mysticism in his writing, which repays repeated reading. It has sayings at the heart of it like these: I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. It has signs: Jesus turning water into wine, healing the man born blind, raising his friend Lazarus from the dead. But the greatest sign in this book is the sign of the cross. where the glory of Jesus, the place where his true identity is revealed, paradoxically, is in his sacrifice. When I am raised up from the earth, he says, I will draw all people to myself. There are so many famous phrases in John. Perhaps one of my favourites is from John chapter 10, verse 10. I have come that you might have life, life in abundance, in all its fullness. A story is told about John living on the island of Patmos at the end of his life as a very old man. The community of believers would gather in church and hope for a word from someone who knew Jesus himself. One day, he stands up with difficulty from his seat at the back of the congregation and shuffles slowly forwards as the people wait expectantly. The sermon is wonderfully short, just 3 words. Love one another. They are a message, a challenge, an invitation to all of us from John today.